Today, we're diving into a story that's about so much more than one country's fight for freedom. It's a story about the brutal, hidden cost of empire and how one rebellion helped bring a global superpower to its knees. We're talking about the Mau Mau Uprising in Kenya. So how does an empire actually die? It's a massive question, right? And it's almost never a single event. There's no one big battle that ends it all. It's more like a slow, painful unraveling. A loss of power, sure, but maybe more importantly, a loss of moral authority. And the story of the Mau Mau is a huge chapter in that unraveling for the British Empire. To really get this, we have to go back to the very beginning. Because before the secret oaths, before the first shot was fired, this whole conflict started with one thing: the land. This was the original wound, the very heart of the entire struggle. Just try to imagine it. The land your people have lived on for generations, the most fertile, most valuable land, is just taken systematically and then handed over to foreign settlers. For the Kikuyu people, this wasn't just an economic disaster. It was a deep cultural and spiritual attack. It created this well of resentment that, was just bound to boil over eventually. And that boiling point, it came in the form of a secret, organized, and really militant movement. So who were the Mau Mau exactly? Well, they were a nationalist movement mostly from the Kikuyu people who were bound together by these secret, powerful oaths. And their goals were incredibly clear. 1, get their land back, and 2, kick the British out. What's kind of fascinating, though, is that even the name Mau Mau is a bit of a mystery. Historians still debate where it actually came from, but nobody debated what they stood for. And that simmering resentment finally exploded into open conflict. Starting around 1952, Mau Mau fighters launched a guerrilla war. And their targets were very specific: the white settlers on their land and, this is crucial, any fellow Kenyans they saw as collaborating with the colonial government. And this brings us to the British reaction. The way they chose to fight back would become infamous and ultimately would help change the fate of their entire empire. You see the word bloody used to describe this conflict all the time in historical accounts, and it's absolutely the right word. This wasn't some distant political dispute. It was a vicious, up-close, and incredibly brutal war on both sides. So, in response to the attacks, Britain went all in. They declared a state of emergency, which is basically a polite term for martial law. It gave the colonial government these sweeping powers to arrest and detain anyone they wanted. And this wasn't just a policing action. It was a full-blown military operation designed to completely stamp out the rebellion. And the sheer scale of this operation is just staggering. The British rounded up huge numbers of Kikuyu people. We're talking over 100,000 men, women, and even children who were forced into this massive network of detention camps that some historians have since called Britain's Gulag. And this really gets to the heart of the propaganda war at the time. I mean, look at these two perspectives. The gap is huge. To the British, the Mau Mau were savage terrorists. But to many Kenyans, they were freedom fighters trying to reclaim what was stolen from them. There was just no middle ground. These two worldviews were fundamentally at war. The road from that brutal conflict to Kenya's independence was, as you can imagine, incredibly long, and it came at a staggering human cost. So let's just walk through the timeline really quick. The conflict kicks off in 52 with that state of emergency. By 54, we're at the absolute peak of the fighting and the mass detentions. A huge blow comes in 56 when the rebellion's leader, Dedan Kimathi, is captured. But by then, the momentum for independence was just unstoppable. And only 7 years later, in 1963, Kenya was finally free. Now, about that human cost, just look at these numbers. The estimates suggest over 11,000 Mau Mau fighters were killed. Now compare that to the other side: 32 white settlers and less than 200 British forces. The sheer imbalance of those numbers tells you everything you need to know about how this war was fought. So, the big question is, how did this brutal, messy war in one colony manage to shake an entire global empire to its very foundations? Well, here's the twist. In the end, it wasn't the uprising itself that did the most damage. It was the way Britain chose to crush it. As stories about the torture, the detention camps, and the brutal tactics started leaking out to the world, Britain's image as this kind, civilizing force was just shattered. Its moral authority, the very idea that it had the right to rule, began to crumble. So what's the lasting legacy here? Well, first off, it absolutely sped up Kenya's independence. But bigger than that, it signaled what some have called the beginning of the end for the British Empire. It showed the world the extreme, ugly lengths Britain was willing to go to. but it also showed that the cost of doing so was becoming too high. It inspired other movements across Africa, and it sparked this debate about history and justice that we are still having today. And that's really the key takeaway. The Mau Mau Uprising wasn't just another colonial rebellion. It was a catalyst. It forced the world to see the brutal reality of what it took to hold an empire together in the 20th century. And by doing that, it helped speed up its end. And that brings us to one last thought. For decades, the official story, the British story, of the Mau Mau dominated everything. But as new evidence, new archives, and new voices have come to light, that whole narrative is changing. And it leaves us with a really critical question.